Let's jump now to the health panel. I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Jehad Rahima, Senior Vice President, BD, QIC Group, Advisor to the Vice Chairman and Managing Director, QLM, to moderate the health panel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Before starting the introduction of our esteemed guest, just let me go 2 minutes in history. When I started my career back in 1998 in life and health insurance, we used to do everything manual. Premium calculation, individual premium calculation. We used to use telex to correspond with our reinsurers. Then a couple of years after, when faxes were installed, that was a revolutionary to us. Wow, just put the paper and it's on the other side on spot. Soon they have installed PCs and we said, that's it. Our life now is complete. Then we started in-house development of the IT systems. IT systems that time were just registering data, policy, membership data. So we did not have sort of statistics that would help us into making a good underwriting. I'm looking back now and see where we are now. We are talking now about future, about InsurTech, about digitalizing, about artificial intelligence. So looking at after that, I truly admire the human intelligence which stand behind all this. And it's now left to the next generation of insurance experts to go further in the future. My name is Jehad Rahima. I'm a member of QIC Group. My colleague, Mr. Sebastien.
Hi, good afternoon. So my name's Seb Burnett. So I'm from Deloitte and I run our kind of European and operations for Converge Health, which is our kind of health tech assets that's trying to help organizations kind of realize the future of health. I'm very fortunate in the work that I do that I get to help organizations strategize around how they enable that future of health through to actually implement it as well. And actually, the thing that I'm really fortunate about is, given that health tech and digital health is so kind of pervasive and it's around the consumer and the person, actually it touches on many different industries. So my background has been in life sciences and public health and helping those organizations drive forward, but more recently starting to work in health insurance, actually starting to work with telecommunications companies, drinks companies, again, around how can they help improve the lives of us humans, our friends, our families, which is kind of why I love this area so much. The other thing that I do quite a lot of, and has been a word of the day, is kind of work around kind of health tech, digital health ecosystems around Europe, and I find it fascinating and really elevating around the fantastic work that's being done across the world, and really found some fascinating kind of organizations today that pitched not only in the six, but also I had the pleasure of doing some of the kind of panels and the judging from some of the previous rounds as well, looking at all the fantastic startups and digital health organizations that are coming to bear, everything from reuse of data all the way through to kind of engagement, wellness, and AI as well. So thank you for having me. So we're going to go and just introduce kind of 90 seconds each of our panelists, and then we'll get into the questions later. Jehad and myself will be co-moderating just to mix it up and make it a bit interesting. I sat next to him this time to avoid the kind of the moving of the head like you'd have at Wimbledon, which is happening, I think, in a few weeks in the UK as well. So, Mohammad, do you want to go next? And congratulations on early today as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I think I have already been introduced. I'm Mohammad. I'm the founder and CEO of Avi and a computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon.
Thanks. And my name is Ole-Bjorn. That's very difficult to pronounce. Don't worry. Everybody can call me OB. and I work for Dawn Health, which is a Copenhagen-based digital health development agency, and I run our Middle East operations out of Dubai. And we are trying to build solutions for patients in a variety of chronic disease areas together with our partners in the life science industry, which is predominantly predominantly pharmaceutical companies, but also getting closer to insurance companies. We're moving into enzymes companies, just like Seb was saying, when it comes to data and really having that patient-centric focus. It easily spills into many adjacent industries. So we cover anything from consulting across design to software development, hosting and deployment. Let's see what else. Down the road, we are also in Q1 next year launching a platform to democratize the development and launch of regulated solutions, regulated in the European sense here, so namely DTX products and SAMD products.
All right, thank you. My name is Javed. I spent 10 minutes earlier today introducing myself and my company. But from WellX, a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not an insurance person, wasn't born in insurance, didn't work in insurance, spent the majority of my life in banking, but having made the transition, I'm very excited to be here and to spend the time with the rest of the panel today.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I mean, let's go to the future. Mohammad, what do you think the future health insurer would look like?
So AI is going to play a major role in automating a lot of processes within the health insurance sector. Everything, I assume, will happen instantly, more accurately, more convenience is going to be brought to the domain. So I can imagine, for instance, if I'm going to the hospital and I need a pre-approval, maybe I can do it through Avi, and then automatically Avi is going to tell me it's okay or not. I reach there, and then there will be a claim after I see the doctor. The moment the note actually is inserted into the EMR, we integrate with the EMR. Just from the moment I leave the doctor office to the moment I go to check out, the claim will be processed. And I would know actually whether it was approved or disapproved and how much I should pay. So it's a completely different journey when it comes actually to health insurance. Another thing actually that is more specific to the insurer themselves, I think many people touched upon dynamic pricing. So the way I view it from a mathematical perspective, you know, every phenomenon in life can be interpreted through a mathematical distribution. The way I see health insurance, it follows a power law distribution. So you get a bucket of people whom you lose from because they spend a lot and you have to pay for them. And another bucket that actually they spend much less. And if you do the mathematical integration for that long tail phenomenon, if you view the distribution, actually there is a theorem about this. That long tail actually is 3x more than the first bucket. And that's, I believe, how insurers typically, if they are pricing correctly, they need to price. Because if the gain from that big long tail offsets the loss, they make money. I think dynamic pricing is going to play a major role. How, for instance, in Avi, so you see that people talk to Avi, and every session with AI is recorded, of course, by the permission of the patient. We have an idea now to start doing prognosis. So over time, the algorithm is going to start actually predicting what will happen to the patient before it happens. And we want to help, the way we view it, we want to help not only the insurers, we want to help the insurers, but we want to help the patients, and we want to help also the providers. We are really playing it that way. We want everyone to win. So with respect to the insurer, we can easily predict what will happen and then provide them actually with what they call the underwriting. Like, this is how much this person is going to cost you. With respect to the patient, we're going to try actually to be more preventive. Look, maybe this will happen to you. Of course, there's this scary part. We're going to work on it. But maybe you should actually, I don't know, sleep more. Maybe you should eat healthier. Stop eating, I don't know, meat every day or whatever. So that we can actually make the person healthier and as such avoid what could happen to him. and so on and so forth. So there is this dynamic pricing idea that is enabled by artificial intelligence that will empower insurers, and it will empower at the same time the patients. And we can go on and on with, with the provider as well, but that's actually just a few concrete examples about how we view the future of the insurer, the provider, and the patient all together.
Thank you, Mohammad. Ole, would you like to add?
Sure. So I want to echo what you say, and I would then add to that and say, well, the enabling factor here being data, of course, right? And you need to have that data feeding across the ecosystem, which is also where the digital health solutions then come into the space, because otherwise how are we or the patient going to collect that data and provide it to the trusted third party or the trusted analyzing service provider like your companies or others, right? So this is where the patient-centric digital solutions come into play, and how can we support the patients through their treatment journey and making sure that we add value to the patient directly so they provide data that is actionable for them, and then data that is insightful and usable for service providers that they allow to access that data. So ultimately we can help the patient in more than just the direct care, but also in the financing, as you say. And I think that is sort of the wider ecosystem we're moving towards, and why insurance and healthcare providers and digital solutions and pharmaceutical companies, they're all getting closer together, and it's unavoidable.
Javid.
You know what? I forgot the question. Do you want to repeat it?
How do you see
the future?
Future health insurer?
Yeah, let's put ourselves in a bit of a time capsule. I think the one thing that a lot of us have been speaking about is customer centricity. I know Ala and Rita were quite vocal about this. I think if we put ourselves in a time capsule, and I know this is something that a lot of us have been, as InsurTechs, are sort of driving towards, is building a world in which the consumer stands to gain, irrespective of what each person in the puzzle does. I think the gentlemen to my left have very nicely articulated how every cog in the wheel needs to operate to be able to provide the consumer the end goal. But I think the way that this industry will unfold, it's rapidly changing, and the pace at which it's changing is unheard of. Is something that the consumer will continue to demand. So if you were to ask me what this looks like today, I think we're seeing an industry that's evolving at a rapid pace. What it's going to look like tomorrow is anybody's guess. But I think what we're doing is taking steps in the right way to be able to make this a world in which consumers can access hyper-personalized care across the board. So whether it's AI, whether it's real doctors that provide the medical care on the other side, or whether it's data. I think the consumer is the one that's going to drive it, and I think that's how us as InsurTechs need to start looking at the solution and the way forward.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And something we're starting to see a lot of organizations and start to think around, around that consumer, and I kind of Profina talked a little bit around it, creating that kind of decentralized view of all your data, is actually how far do you want to bring those different types of data together? What modalities of data do you want to bring together, be it environment, genomic, etc.? How do you then build out actually a digital twin of yourself that allows you to look at what the future could look like? Again, so exactly as you're saying, how likely am I going to be to take money from the insurance company? What diseases do I need to think through? How do I live my life better to actually drive a more preventative healthcare solution in the future? How do I build that whole ecosystem together that allows me to run, I can't remember who it was earlier today, talking about those little AI bots that would essentially run in your data on your digital twin that will help you live a healthier, better life if you chose to do it in the future as well. So again, that's something that a lot of organizations are starting, or organizations and public health organizations are starting to think through, is how do you actually create that digital twin of your human that essentially reduced overall kind of healthcare costs in the future, which I think is personally fascinating, but I think we are a long way out from that in the future. So we talked a lot about AI. Everyone talks a lot about AI at the moment as being kind of that thing that's going to drive massive transformational change, and I completely agree. But actually, what other kind of core technologies, capabilities do you think will help accelerate value for the consumers of the health insurance, but also actually the health insurers as well? So Ole-Bjorn, do you want to go to that first?
Sure. So I think one of the things we're very likely to see in the near future would be insurance companies requiring pharmaceutical companies to prove the efficacy of their drugs in a real-world setting, right? This is what we call real-world evidence. Now, for pharmaceutical companies, that's incredibly difficult to collect and to validate, which is where the digital solutions comes into play. So even if insurance companies don't provide solutions directly to patients and that the patients feel comfortable using, the data is incredibly likely to come anyway because it is likely to be a requirement, right? And so again, coming back to the whole interconnectedness and as you said, the cogs in the wheels, they need to play together. So yeah, I think that is the main sort of game changer that we will see on phase 4 trials to really validate medicines.
And I think also it's going to be really interesting is around how do you kind of also put together medicines and some of the kind of the digital tools, the nudging, etc., and how they therefore drive those kind of efficiencies around patient outcomes as well. Javed, you got anything to add around some of those kind of new technologies? Loads of people always talk about blockchain. It's not talked about all the time. Not many people have done much with it. Estonia have done a really good job in the healthcare system. I don't know what your views on blockchain are for the health insurance industry.
So I think blockchain as a concept has evolved significantly, right?
Yeah.
So there was a time when blockchain was sort of like the promised land, right? People were saying blockchain can cure cancer, you know, that it was that crazy, right? There was this phase. But I think what we've really come down to now at this point is being able to decentralize. I love the way you articulated the entire decentralization of health insurance, sort of like what Meta is trying to do on the other side when it comes to digital cities. But I think the use cases have now really gotten penned down, and if we're able to bring all the different parties together on sort of on a singular exercise of bringing down those health insurance costs that a national spend, I think we're on the right track of making things happen, creating real impact.
Mohammad, anything to add?
The way I understood your question, it has more to do with the technology. So let me give one example. When I was living in Pennsylvania, my roommate was a medical doctor at UPMC. And UPMC is a huge, like it's top 10 in the US. And he used to tell me all the time that they struggle so much to establish rapport with patients. And it's so crucial, by the way, to establish that rapport to a certain extent so that they can give some confidence or more confidence to the patients, because psychology plays a major role in these kinds of things. And they recently, a study was published actually in the US, showed that a doctor in the US on average spends 3 to 4 hours every day just typing in the notes or whatever. So the patient comes in, the doctor is just like, and you know, they are not computer scientists. It will take time for them to input the data. So Google started working actually over the past 3-4 years on a beautiful technology. They use recurrent neural networks in deep learning actually to extract symptoms automatically on the fly from the clinical conversation. So the doctor is talking with the patient, and then the AI algorithm is just listening. And let me define actually what I mean by AI, because everyone talks about AI. So the way I see or I define AI informally, not mathematically, is to be able to train a machine to learn and produce an intelligent behavior. And that intelligent behavior, the way we view it at AVI, is it involves 4 components. You make the machine listen, you make the machine think, and you make the machine speak, and maybe, I'm sure you all saw the news in the past few weeks, maybe you make the machine feel, okay? So the focus so far on AVI was to make the machine think. And we started already a project, and we're making a lot of progress, by the way, to make AVI listen and speak. It's gonna come out soon. But the idea, back to that core idea here that I want to communicate, so that algorithm will listen, will think, will extract symptoms, will automatically generate the note, and then store it in the EMR. All what the doctor needs to do is simply actually to check that note and approve it and maybe do some edits. Imagine with that note, with that technology, automatically AVI consumes all those symptoms, Like, so this is complementary. And then AVI generates a diagnosis, because diagnostic errors, 10.4% of people in the US die every year because of diagnostic errors. That's in the US. Imagine those symptoms are automatically fed to AVI, and then AVI is going to generate the diagnosis and hide it. And once the doctor actually inputs the diagnosis, then AVI is going to validate it immediately, and then alert the doctor if there is anything. And AVI, by the way, we did a study against medical doctors with an average experience of 16.6 years. And at the moment, even the one that is in production now, it exceeded the performance of human doctors. So all these kinds of technologies are massive, and they are coming. I think in the morning there was a session, and someone mentioned, I think Dr. Unkal mentioned a beautiful term. They said AI is the next oil, right? I believe so. And it's not only AI, if I am to answer the question directly. You need these systems, techniques that can work at scale. You want to do this with millions of people. You want literally to do everything immediately, accurately, and in a beautiful manner. And that's, by the way, the beauty about Google, right? So Google runs on millions of machines. You need systems techniques. That's what we call in computer science distributed systems. In addition, actually, to the intelligence that we are talking about. So get these together, that's maybe us. Get the knowledge from the domain, that's maybe Jehad and all the experts here in the domain. Combine these together, and you're going to see beautiful stuff. Literally beautiful stuff that are going to change the domain massively. And I think that's actually the core message of this conference. This is what we are all aiming for, to come together and see how we can complement each other. And each one actually pitches with what they know about. And then together, maybe we can do something beautiful to this region.
That's beautiful. I love it. But I'm going to dampen the mood a little bit, if that's okay, very quickly, and ask a couple of questions. So I don't know if people have been looking at the news today, but Microsoft pulled some of their facial AI recognition software and services from the market because they're worried about kind of the use of ethical AI, right? We know that regulators, especially around health data, is tough. Getting your algorithms validated, what happens, if it gets it wrong. Mohammad, I'm going to come to you first, given a lot of the work you're doing at the moment, just to comment on what needs to change working with regulators around ethical AI organizations to try and help not stifle innovation too much, because that does worry me a little bit.
That's a beautiful question. By the way, anything that touches the public at scale should be regulated. And that's the idea of FDA, right? Right? So if you're going to actually give the vaccine to people, you cannot simply go and say, okay, I have the vaccine and I'm going to give it to people, right? It has to go through this channel. It has to be validated, because it's going to actually impact hundreds of millions of people. And AI is a technology that is going to actually hit maybe within 5 years. I believe within 10 years, we're not going to drive our cars, by the way. You know this, right? The self-driving cars. It's going to happen soon, within 10 years. So AI is going to touch every single person of us. And AI has a dual usage. It could actually be good, and it could be bad. And you need the regulator actually to regulate it, or otherwise we might actually see the bad arising, and we don't want to see that. That's one thing. Two, I strongly believe that there is a big responsibility on the inventor, right? So the reason of why we spent 3.5 years doing research, for instance, on the ABI, which is a diagnostic system, we did not want to launch something that is not accurate. I mean, this is so critical. We could have launched it maybe a year earlier, but then we're not going to establish that trust with people, and we might hurt people. So there is this ethical responsibility on the inventor. The regulator is going to try to do something with you, but at the end of the day, you need to go back to your principles and to your ethics and make sure that you are doing the right thing. Now, the problem is that not everyone is going to make sure to do the right thing, but here comes the regulator, right? So everything has to be validated, and we really need a regulation entity just for AI and technology.
Great, thank you. Ole-Bjorn, do you want to comment on especially the stifling element around it? Because agreed, you need a regulation and you need a regulator, but given the amount of algorithms, applications, organizations get in this space, how are regulators going to cope?
Sure. So I think it's a matter of defining some standards, right? And there has already been some standards defined that are pretty good under European regulation with the MDR. So I would imagine that you guys, Mohammad, are ISO 13485 certified, and if you're not, you're gonna be. And just like you're ISO 27001 certified, and if you're not, you're gonna be, right? And that's good, because that means that we can create that trust in the ecosystem. We can create that trust amongst the users, amongst the physicians, amongst payers, clinics, and so forth. And that also becomes a little bit a hurdle for startups, right? So some of the startups we've talked about today, they may or they may not have these certifications in place, and that limits their scale at some point, and that stifles the ecosystem a little bit. And this is where especially the Middle East has and the Gulf region in particular, has a very, very interesting role to play, at least in my perspective, because we don't have the same very, very, very cumbersome regulation as you have in Europe, but there's still a very, very high focus on quality and patient safety, right? So that means that we have a certain level of nimbleness where we can put solutions into the market and validate their use in a more sort of like smaller setting, and then if it works and it works well, then we can scale it into the world, right? And that means that the Gulf region can position as de facto being a spearhead of innovation and being a global innovation center simply by having this slightly more nimble regulatory framework.
Thank you, Ole-Bjorn. I mean, you know, everything we do in our industry, in your industry, in any industry is customer focused. I mean, our main objective is customer. Now, a question, maybe Javid, we can start with you. What is the importance of ecosystems into driving values for customers?
So I think the one thing that customers have come to get used to now is the fact that they have choice, right? And they want to be able to maintain control over everything that they do. If you look at, major organizations that have come over in the last couple of years, like Uber, all they've done is put the power of control in the customer's hand, and they've revolutionized an entire industry that's been around for so long, right? So I feel like the ability to give the customer that choice and control is what will set anybody apart from competition. So when you look at ecosystems, and this is pretty much what we've done at WellX, is when we started off, we went very, very much the MVP route, and we said we want to make sure that we give customers enough choice to do what they want. Wellness is one of those sort of very sensitive topics. Health is a very sensitive topic where everybody has a different formula for success when it comes to themselves, right? So I like playing paddle tennis, I like playing football. I cannot go to the gym because I get bored, and I'm just going to walk out. But that works for me, and I'm happy. My co-founder, on the other hand, goes to Barry's boot camp every morning and spends 2-3 hours over there doing, what he does, and he enjoys it, he loves it. So I think in order to be able to drive the space that we're sitting in today, you want to be able to give or enable customers to do what's good for them instead of forcing them to do how we feel things should actually move forward. And everyone stands to benefit from it because nobody can do everything, but everybody can do everything together, right? So if one person tries to do everything, they'll do a little bit good from everything. But if everyone who's good at what they're doing does what they're doing, and we're able to bring everything together, consolidate it, aggregate it, where we stand out to win so much more. I think essentially, if we're able to bring and aggregate all of these different providers within the ecosystem towards bettering our space in health or health insurance, you're able to provide the customer with that relevant choice and that relevant control to be able to build better products and solutions. And coming back to what you mentioned earlier is if you're building around the customer, then you make sure you've got an ecosystem that caters to that customer.
I think that's a really interesting point actually around like the hyper-personalization you're talking about around what's the value, what's the goal for that consumer. What actually is really interesting as well is that goal will continue to change over time. So actually, if I look at the last 2 years of my life, I started off exercising for sanity over COVID in a certain way, and I found different coping mechanisms would change over that period of time. There's also some really interesting kind of behavioral science thought leadership around how you set the goal. If you set it too easy, people just give up and they don't bother. You set it too hard, they give up. So you have to keep adjusting the goal that you put in front of the consumer to keep them engaged, to keep them going, to keep them, driving forward some of their health as well, which I think is really fascinating actually around that kind of behavioural science piece. I don't know, Mohammad, you look like you've got to add to that.
I want to add to that because it's a very critical question. Thank you, Jehad. I think the crux of the problem is what experts in the domain call the moral hazard. And there's a lot of studies actually, especially in the US, in the insurance domain about moral hazards. Very briefly, a moral hazard is of two types, either a consumer moral hazard or a provider moral hazard. So they showed actually over time in the US that when the provider realizes that the patient has insurance, they tend actually to prescribe more, procedures and medicines and do more stuff because it's like some providers really consider the patient to be a victim. That's how they are going to make money. Right, so the consumer is easy. They found also that when the patient realizes they have insurance, they tend to go to doctors more because they know that the insurer is going to pay. But just to focus on the provider moral hazard, you see, we don't really need, and that's actually, I did not have the time to explain this today in the pitch, you don't really need to do only claim processing. You need to do intelligent claim processing. And what do I mean by intelligent claim processing? After you validate the diagnosis, and I believe actually that Avi brought a completely new idea to the domain when it comes to diagnosis validation. Because Avi takes the AI session that happens with the policyholder and the doctor session and does what we call two-point matching using a very sophisticated mathematical model. And it says actually, it alerts the insurer of whether actually there is a problem with the diagnosis to begin with. But aside from that, the intelligent processing actually takes the diagnosis and does some actually processing in the mapping between the diagnosis and the procedures. And it really works in a way, just as an analogy so that we can all understand it very easily, similar to Google. It says, look, this procedure, here is how for this diagnosis, me as an artificial intelligence algorithm, I rank the procedures. I believe that this is the first procedure that can go. Then this is the next. And wait a minute, there is a mark here. These two should not, nothing should go afterwards before you do these two, before you go and do something else. For instance, you should not go and do an X-ray or MRI before you do, for instance, I don't know, a CT, solar, I don't know what they call this thing for the abdomen. But in any regards, the idea here, you want the algorithm to be intelligent enough to avoid the provider from doing more on the patient, which goes against the health of the patient, by the way, and as such charging the insurer more money. You see, and if you can manage to have AI or a technology that can do this, do you know what you are doing? You are becoming customer-centric because you are really saving the patient and you are really saving the insurer, literally, if you can do that.
Thank you, Mohammad.
Just one example.
But anyway, I mean, the healthcare fraud is a topic by itself, and it needs maybe months to sit and discuss. However, it's a two-party. I mean, it's the patient and the doctor conspiring about doing this. Cannot happen from one side. Seb?
So, LAB, you talked about this earlier, and something that really, so my background has very much been around working in healthcare environment, but a lot around life sciences organizations as well. And one of the things that really, really excites me is the future of digital therapeutics. Right, this is, in my opinion, going to transform a lot of things. We're seeing lots of life science organizations partnering with kind of digital health applications. I think Biogen announced one today with Happify, and they've had a couple recently. We're seeing public health organizations start to offer some of these as well. Health insurance, I've not seen so far any of these kind of announcements. Do you think they're missing out? Do you think they need to start paying more attention to some of these kind of modalities of care? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Sure, and I think it follows up well on what you say about how do we serve the patient better while also saving money, right? And what you're talking about really is how do we cut down on unnecessary procedures. Okay, but then if we could extend that to how do we cut down on procedures, right? If we can prevent instead of cure. That's kind of what we want to go for, right? And that's where digital therapeutics come into the question. So how much can we do with patients directly that will nudge them and support them and coach them and mentor them and educate them to make the right life choices at the right time? And how can we do that either, pre-diagnosis, but also post-diagnosis, so we support them through the treatment journey to lower later comorbidities, we lower later side-on, add-on diseases that would maybe come on later. And as you said, yes, plenty of organizations are working on that, and as you say, yes, we're not seeing a lot of that from insurance yet. And I'm pretty sure that yet being the key word here, because it will come. Simply because the incentive is so strong, so it is almost unavoidable. Also because you sit, and when I say you, I mean of course QIC, but also the wider industry, really sit on data that can be leveraged and communication channels that can be leveraged to put some of these solutions into the hands of patients before they even come and engage with the pharmaceutical company that might put a similar solution into their hands. So you have a competitive advantage, which is also why I am, like you, a little bit surprised that it has not come earlier, but I'm sure that it will come.
Javed, do you want to go a little bit from the kind of wellness point of view as well? Obviously, that has a big part to play, maybe not digital therapeutics, but around mental health, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think preventative care is what it's all about, right? I know Jehad and I were having this discussion earlier on. It's about reverse engineering the whole product of health insurance.
So you are quoting the name now.
Absolutely, 100%. So yeah, so it's about reverse engineering the concept, right? It's about not looking after you, and this connects back to what I said in my last slide on our purpose. It's about becoming the customer's sort of best friend or family, because ultimately, as insurers, we're picking up the bill, right, when they get sick. So why not focus on not allowing them to get sick in the first place? And that revolves around changing behaviors. Now, to be able to do that, you need to have institutions within the industry that have that sort of patience to start building upon customer behavioral change and how that behavioral change impacts claims in the longer run. I think in the immediate run, what we need to be able to focus on is creating that, and I think we're sitting at this place right now, this juncture right now, where we have the ability to reset as an industry. I mean, we've been doing this for as long as we have, right? There's been a lot of talk about incumbents and InsurTechs, incumbents and InsurTechs, and for the life of me, I didn't know what an incumbent meant. I had to actually look it up, the Oxford Dictionary. I'm going to very quickly read this out to you, right? So it says, the holder of an office or post, and the way that they've presented it is the present incumbent will soon be retiring. So on a lighter note, I think it gives us the opportunity right now as an industry to reset and to start looking at things from a different perspective. There is this newer generation of startups coming out. I know there's regulation that we've heard stifles innovation, but then you have the bigger players, and this is an excellent example of this, right? Large players like QIC that are coming up to the stage to actually say, we want to do something about it. So I think we're at that right moment where we can start focusing on this element instead of focusing on what's the limit that we can provide on health insurance? Like, can I give $1 million limit or a $500,000 limit? I mean, when COVID happened, nobody was looking at what their limits were, right? Everyone was, I wish I worked better on myself so that, my immune system would have been stronger, because at that point, your limits meant nothing, right? So it all comes down to how do we flip the entire narrative, and I think what you mentioned earlier is definitely one very strong element in bringing together that puzzle.
That leads me another question. I mean, you mentioned reverse engineering, so I see, the solutions that takes care of the patient's health and lifestyle, they are reverse engineering into healthcare insurance. Now, how do you see that changing the behavior of insurance buying and managing your insurance products?
Right. I think consumer behavior has already been seen across, and I put that on the slide, the way that consumers interact with your bigger players in the tech space already, right? So consumers, the way they interact with Google or YouTube, I think pretty much come in and they demand certain value and personalization, right? So I feel the way that this is going to, and I mentioned this in our acquisition strategy, today we stand very much in a broker, insurer-led industry, the bigger players, and they're the ones that you need to work with to be able to get your product to market. But I think over a period of time, you're going to start to see that change. People are going to look for wellness where wellness is offered. Insurance companies don't offer health and wellness today. And if we're able to come together right now and hit that reset button, as InsurTechs, we have the ability to do that, right? So if we're able to come together and start to spin the narrative the way we mentioned earlier, and we're able to give consumers the product at the time that they need it, where they're looking for it, right? So if I go and embed my product in a gym, right? And I know Vitality has done that in the past, and it's worked to their advantage. If I embed my product in hospitals, for that matter, in more prevention sort of clinics, right? You're then going to the place of the consumer. You're reaching the consumer at a point where he needs to look for that care, or he's looking for that care. And I see that as being the new model of engagement between consumers and insurance companies.
I think Ole-Bjorn, have anything?
Sure. No, I echo all of what you say. I agree entirely. That's the short version. To add a little bit to it would be, well, probably more integrated models, right? So how do we serve the patient in a more integrated way and become a full partner to their health? And it has been mentioned a couple of times over the day, but maybe a good example is we're launching an obesity clinic in Denmark and in the UAE now. We have just launched it. And one of the value propositions in that clinic is that it's virtual first. So it's virtual care. They can, in Dubai, also go see a physical clinic, but in Denmark it's virtual. And then there's a digital therapeutics companion where we will have a flexible dosing algorithm, so that becomes a DTX, right? So that becomes a digital therapeutic, because with the patient using the underlying app, we get the data, which means that we can better titrate the patient, which means that we can lower the cost of the patient, which means that we can lower the risk of the patient, which subsequently, bringing it back to insurance, means that when we then talk to their insurers and we talk about reimbursement, we can lower the price of the patient to the benefit of the patient, to the benefit of the insurance company, and to the benefit of us. It's all about win-win-win and creating those ecosystems.
Cool. So I think we're coming up close to time. I'm just trying to see how much time we've got left, but I think we've got a couple of minutes left. I was just wondering if there are any questions from the audience, either through Menti, although you probably can't see the number because I'm in front of it, or if someone wants to put their hand up maybe and ask a question.
I have a question to you, sir.
Okay.
How do you see the the health care insurance ecosystem?
How do I see it working?
Let's say in 10 years, how do you see the ecosystem of the healthcare insurance, let's say 10 years from now?
So I believe that the health and well-being ecosystem, the consumer, patient, human, whatever you want to call them, will be at the heart. Their data will convene around them. We'll start to think around the digital twin. And I think the three kind of bullet points are hyper-personalization. I think we've talked about a couple of points. So things that are very specific to that person's motivations, their needs. I think the other one will be, I call it interoperable data. So being able to consume and move data around from lots of different modalities, from lots of different sources. So think clinical, think environmental, think genomics or molecular data, all of which allows you to make better hyper-personalization. And then lastly, I think it will all be built on an open and modular kind of set of secure things, solutions, right? And this is really, really important. This is where the ecosystem comes together, because no one player, no one organization can control all of that. If you do, you'll stifle innovation, you'll stifle progress. So what needs to happen on top of having those interoperable data is also allow organizations to be able to kind of plug and play their things into that kind of digital twin as we talked earlier. So my view is the world will be in the future where you can plug different algorithms in potentially. So an algorithm could be looking at my passive data collected by my walking, my typing, that predict early onset of Alzheimer's, and therefore I can start some intervention, or it could be something like that. So that's my kind of view around that kind of plug and play modular approach that will be controlled by the human at the center of it, and they will control what they want to do and when they want to do it. Some people will decide they don't want any of it. They live their lives, they don't want to worry, and that's fine. Some people will want to start looking at things like heart disease, because both my parents died young from heart attacks, so actually I want to look at it. They'll start looking at using their watches to look for, like I was actually talking to someone the other day who had long COVID, and he went to his doctor, and his Apple Watch detected AFib before the doctor did, because he started going, saying he wasn't feeling very well during the long COVID. He said his Apple Watch had seen that, and the doctor was like, yeah, okay, we'll check you out anyway. And it was like, oh, actually, yeah, you do. We need to do something about it, which is really, really interesting. So we're starting to see things start to plug in, how the ecosystem will evolve, who's going to control it. We'll see in the future, but it will definitely be consumer-driven, consumer-led, and the consumer with the data at the heart of it is my personal view.
Thank you, Seb. No questions from audience? And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Just one small note to the audience. When I said that I started my career in 1989, that does not mean I'm old. I'm just a bit over 25. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.